On my birthday, my parents didn't bring a cake or a gift. They brought boxes and told me to leave. Months later, they were sitting in courtrooms facing investigations, while I stood in the kitchen of the house they once tried to take from me, realizing that being kicked out didn't ruin my life. It saved it. My name is Lauren Hayes, and the day my real life began was the same day my parents decided I no longer belonged in their house. It was my birthday, the kind of day you expect at least a little kindness, and instead, I came home to find myself erased. I'd just finished a long shift at the grocery store, exhausted, feet throbbing, still smelling like burnt coffee and cardboard boxes. All day, I'd been looking forward to one small thing. On my break, I'd bought myself a cheap cupcake from the bakery section, thinking if no one else celebrated me, I would. I imagined maybe a quiet night at home. Takeout. Something simple. Something safe. When I turned onto our street, I knew immediately something was wrong. There were no balloons, no cars parked out front. Just my life dumped across the lawn like it had been cleared out for a garage sale. Suitcases, cardboard boxes, a plastic bin stuffed with old college books, my laptop wrapped in a blanket like an afterthought. For a second, I thought maybe there'd been a pipe burst or some kind of emergency. I parked crooked, left the cupcake melting on the passenger seat, and walked toward the house. My mom stood on the porch with her arms folded tight across her chest. My dad hovered a step behind her, staring at the ground like he'd misplaced something important. My younger sister, Megan, sat on the steps, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. No one said, "Happy birthday." My mom broke the silence first. "You're 26, Lauren. This can't keep going. We need the room. You're moving out." I just stared at her. "Today?" I asked quietly. "You're doing this today?" She rolled her eyes like I was inconveniencing her. "Don't make this dramatic. We raised you. We did our job. You have a paycheck. You'll figure it out." My dad finally lifted his head long enough to add, "It's for your own good. You'll grow once you're pushed." Megan smirked. "Everyone I know moved out years ago. You should honestly be thanking Mom." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I paid most of the utility bills, that the Wi-Fi Megan used for her classes stayed on because of my paycheck, that this house worked because I made it work. But I already knew how it would end. My mom crying and calling me ungrateful, my dad backing away, my sister recording it for entertainment, and I'd still be standing outside. So I didn't give them a performance. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked instead. My mom shrugged. "You're an adult. Stay with a friend. Find something cheap. Just don't expect to come back. We're turning your room into something useful." Useful. Like I hadn't been? They kicked me out on my own birthday, and I said nothing. I picked up the first box and carried it to my beat-up car. Then another and another. No begging, no bargaining, just the scrape of cardboard against concrete and the quiet sound of something breaking inside me. When the last box was loaded, I looked at the front door one final time and realized it had never really been my home. I got in the car and drove until neighborhoods disappeared and highway signs took over. Eventually, I pulled into a roadside motel with half the sign burned out. The room smelled like bleach and old smoke. The bed was stiff, the ceiling stained, but the key was in my hand and no one could tell me to leave. I sat on the edge of the mattress, ate my cold cupcake alone, and checked my bank balance. The number made my chest tighten. For a moment, I almost called my mom, almost asked for a few days, almost apologized for existing. Then I remembered how calmly she stood there while my life sat on the lawn. They didn't hesitate, so neither did I. Lying there, staring at the ceiling, I made myself a promise. I would never beg to return to a place that treated me like garbage on the one day I deserved better. If they wanted me gone so badly, I would build a life so solid they'd regret ever pushing me out. The next morning, I woke up sore, exhausted, and completely alone. I checked my phone, half expecting a missed call, an apology, anything. There was nothing, just a calendar notification that read, "Happy birthday, Lauren." I showered in lukewarm water, put on my uniform, and went to work like my world hadn't collapsed. I smiled at customers, scanned groceries, talked about sales and recipes while my brain screams, "You don't have a place to sleep tonight." On my break, I searched for rooms online, filtering by cheapest first and praying none of them came with police tape. Seattle was only an hour away, but the rent numbers made my stomach churn. By the end of the day, I'd arranged to see a tiny studio with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. It was cramped, overpriced, but the landlord didn't ask questions as long as I paid the deposit. I signed with shaking hands. The weeks that followed were brutal. I kept my grocery store job, but added late-night shifts at a burger place near the studio. My life turned into survival mode. Up before sunrise, groceries all day, burgers all night, stumbling home smelling like grease and exhaustion. There was no time to think about my family. That was intentional. One night, a regular came through my grocery line, Rachel Monroe. She always carried a laptop bag and wore a Bluetooth headset, always talking about investors and deadlines. That night, her reusable bag tore mid-checkout. Without thinking, I taped it up, double-bagged the heavy stuff, and joked about duct tape holding adult life together. She laughed and looked at my name tag. "You're the one who fixes the self-checkouts, right?" I shrugged, embarrassed. I just reset them when they froze. She made it sound like a miracle. She asked how long I'd worked there, and before I could stop myself, the truth spilled out. Short, stripped down, raw. That conversation changed everything. I finished my story in a rush, like if I stopped talking, I might lose the nerve. I told Rachel Monroe the basics. My parents kicked me out, I was barely keeping my head above water, 2 jobs, a tiny apartment, no real plan beyond surviving the next month. I braced for the pity look, the awkward silence, the polite, "That's rough." Instead, she studied me for a second and said, "You know, my startup is always looking for people who can solve problems and actually show up. Ever thought about tech?" I laughed out loud. It sounded ridiculous. Me? Tech? I hadn't even finished college. She didn't laugh with me. She explained how plenty of people switched careers without degrees. She told me about coding boot camps, free online resources, and how most of the industry cared more about what you could do than where you came from. Then she did something I still think about to this day. She flipped my receipt over, wrote down her email, and slid it across the counter. "If you're serious about changing your life, send me a message. I can't promise you anything, but I can point you in the right direction." That night, after my burger shift, I sat at the tiny table in my studio with my laptop open and started searching. Free coding courses, beginner tutorials, boot camps in Seattle. The words on the screen might as well have been another language. But one thought wouldn't let me sleep. I'd already lost everything once. What was the worst that could happen if I tried and failed again? Over the next few months, I stole time from places it didn't exist. I watched JavaScript tutorials during lunch breaks. I printed cheat sheets and taped them above my thrift store desk. I joined free online forums where people asked questions I barely understood, but I read every answer anyway. Slowly, painfully slowly, things started to click. Late one night, after finishing a messy little practice project, I finally worked up the courage to email Rachel.
I told her I was serious. I sent screenshots of the tiny websites I'd built by copying tutorials line by line, then breaking them, then fixing them again. She replied the next day, not with a job offer, but with something better. She sent me a link to a part-time coding bootcamp she trusted and added a note. If you get into this and commit, I'll talk to my team about an internship. I applied, assuming it was a long shot. Somehow, I got in. My schedule turned brutal. Grocery store in the mornings, fewer burger shifts because I needed time to study, boot camp classes at night and on weekends. I lived on ramen, black coffee, and the occasional free meal when the burger place messed up an order. Friends stopped inviting me because my answer was always the same. I have to work. I have to study. There were nights I stared at error messages until my eyes burned, feeling stupid and behind, days when my
There was no furniture yet, just empty rooms and bare walls that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. That first night, I lay on the living room floor with one pillow and a blanket, staring up at the ceiling while the city hummed outside and the house stayed quiet inside. No one could tell me I was taking up too much space. No one could decide my room belonged to someone else. This place had my name on it. Over the next few months, I built a life inside those walls. I bought a couch that didn't come from the curb. I set up a real desk with an actual monitor in the spare room and called it my office. I hosted a few coworkers, cooked real meals, laughed too loudly, and no one complained. On clear nights, I'd stand on the small balcony with a mug of tea, looking out over the neighborhood and thinking about the distance between a roadside motel and this quiet moment. I started sharing pieces of my story online, not to trash my parents, but to talk about getting kicked out, hitting bottom, and climbing back. Strangers messaged me saying they felt seen, that their families had pushed them out too, just in different ways. For the first time, my pain helped someone else. I thought that was the ending. Kicked out on my birthday, fought my way up, bought a house, clean, simple arc. But life doesn't wrap things up neatly. And apparently, my parents didn't like being written out of my ending. One quiet Sunday afternoon, I was unpacking groceries, humming to myself, when the doorbell rang. I didn't think much of it, maybe a package, maybe a neighbor. I wiped my hands and glanced at the camera screen out of habit. My stomach dropped. There they were. My mother, my father, and my sister Megan, standing on the porch of the house I built without them. For a second, I hoped the camera was glitching. It wasn't. Mom stood front and center, hair grayer, makeup heavier. Dad lingered behind her, shoulders slumped. Megan hovered off to the side, phone already in hand. I could have pretended I wasn't home, but I was done hiding in places I paid for. I opened the door. Mom looked me up and down, then stepped inside without waiting for permission. "Lauren, you look different," she said, already scanning my furniture. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Dad tried a softer tone. "Can we talk for a minute? It's important." Against my instincts, I stepped aside. They walked in like they owned the air. Mom ran her fingers along the couch. "This is nice, much nicer than that little place you had before." Megan whistled. "Wow, you really got yourself a whole house." I stayed near the kitchen island. "Why are you here?" Dad sighed. "Things have been hard. I lost my job. The mortgage is killing us. We might lose the house." Mom jumped in. "The bank doesn't care how long we've lived there. They just want money. We heard you bought a place. That changes things." A flicker of sympathy rose and died just as fast. "I'm sorry things are rough, but what does that have to do with my home?" Mom looked at me like I was being slow. "This isn't just your home. This is a family asset." The words hit like a brick. "Excuse me?" She gestured around the room. "We raised you, fed you, put a roof over your head. We pushed you to be independent. If we hadn't kicked you out, you'd still be stuck at that grocery store. Our tough love made you who you are, so what you have now should benefit the whole family." Dad nodded. "We're not asking for much, just a place to stay.
Your mom and I take one room, Megan another. You still have that office. You don't need a whole room just for a desk. Maybe we even add our names to the paperwork. It helps everyone." I almost laughed. "You kicked me out because you said there wasn't room. You needed my bedroom for Megan. Now suddenly my house is the solution to all your problems?" Mom waved her hand. "We did that for you. You should be grateful. This is our investment paying off." Megan crossed her arms. "You leveled up. You've got extra rooms. Why are you being so selfish?" There it was, the old word. "I'm not selfish for living in the house I worked and paid for. You didn't co-sign anything. You're not on the deed. This is mine." Mom's eyes hardened. "You wouldn't have this job without us. We sacrificed. You owe us. One signature and your parents aren't on the street. Or would you rather watch us become homeless while you sit here alone?" The guilt used to work. Now it just made me tired. "You made your choices. I made mine. I'm not risking my future so you can pretend this is a group project." Megan scoffed. "Money really changed you." "No," I said calmly. "Being thrown out like trash on my birthday changed me. Money just means you can't do it again." Mom lowered her voice. "If you don't help us, we'll take legal action. We're your parents. We have rights. Any judge will see this is a family asset." For a moment, the old fear stirred. Then I remembered whose name was on every page that mattered. "Talk to any lawyer you want. You're not moving in. You're not touching my house. You need to leave." Dad tried once more. "Lauren, please, we're your family." "I did this," I replied, opening the door wide. "Last time you told me to leave. This time I'm asking you to go." Mom laughed bitterly and walked out. Dad followed, staring at the floor. Megan brushed past me and muttered, "You'll regret this." I locked the door behind them. My hands shook, but beneath the adrenaline was something solid. They still thought I was the girl with her life in boxes on their lawn. They were wrong. That night, their threats echoed in my head. Legal action, family asset, parents' rights. The old me would have panicked, Googled laws at 3 a.m. and imagined worst-case scenarios. Instead, I called someone who actually knew what they were talking about. Ethan Ramirez, a civil attorney I'd known through mutual friends, answered within an hour. I told him everything, from the birthday eviction to the visit in my living room. When he finished, he said, "First, breathe. They're not on the deed, right?" "No." "Then they have no claim. DNA doesn't equal ownership." Relief loosened my chest, but he wasn't done. "Did you ever help them with paperwork or bills when you lived there?" "Yes," I said slowly. "Why?" "Because people who feel entitled to your house now often felt entitled to your information back then. Pull your full credit report, not the app version, the real one." My stomach dropped. That night, sitting in the office they wanted to claim, I logged in to all 3 credit bureaus. Accounts loaded onto the screen, some familiar, some not. Store cards I'd never opened. Personal loans tied to my old address. A line of credit opened the year I got kicked out. I called Ethan back. "That," he said evenly, "is identity theft." Over the next few weeks, my life split in two. By day, I wrote code and attended meetings. By night, I gathered documents, filed disputes, and rebuilt my financial identity piece by piece. Some banks cooperated, others treated me like the criminal, but I wasn't fixing their mess for them. I was protecting the life I built without them. At the same time we were disputing the accounts, Ethan filed for a restraining order. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't revenge, it was documentation. We included screenshots of the messages my mom sent after showing up at my house. "You'll regret choosing a house over your family. We'll make sure everyone knows how heartless you are." They thought they were guilt trips. In court, they read like harassment. One night, as we reviewed the paperwork, Ethan paused. "You're sure you want to do this? Once we file, it's official. This stops being a family argument." I thought about standing on the lawn with my life in boxes when my mother told me to figure it out. I thought about them walking into my home like it belonged to them, asking me to sign away control without blinking. "Yeah," I said, "last time they told me to leave. This time I'm asking you to go." The court granted a temporary order first. That meant my parents were legally barred from coming near my house or my workplace until the hearing. When they were served, my phone exploded. My mom left voicemails screaming about betrayal and shame. My dad sent long texts about how this could have been handled privately. Megan sent one message: "You really dragged the law into this? Dramatic much." I didn't respond to any of them. I forwarded everything to Ethan. He added it to the file. Quietly, another chain reaction started. Some of the disputed credit accounts triggered internal lender reviews. One flagged unusual activity and forwarded the file to a federal agency. Another, tied to a home improvement loan taken out just before my parents' financial collapse, caught the attention of the IRS when income records didn't line up. "This could get bigger than you," Ethan warned. "If they've been misusing your identity or playing games with taxes, the IRS doesn't just shrug and walk away." Part of me felt sick hearing that. These were still my parents. The idea of investigations made my stomach twist. But another part of me, the part that slept in a hotel counting wrinkled bills while they stayed comfortable, felt something closer to balance. Months passed. Forms, hearings, phone calls that blurred together. Then the restraining order became permanent. In court, my parents argued I was overreacting, that kids these days called everything abuse, that they were just trying to teach me responsibility. But under oath, with documents spread across the table, their story collapsed. They couldn't explain the loans tied to my social security number. They couldn't explain the texts that sounded like threats. They couldn't turn kicking their daughter out on her birthday into some noble lesson. The judge granted the order, citing a pattern of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. My parents walked out of that courtroom looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. That was only round one. Round two came when the IRS finished whatever quiet work they'd been doing in the background. I was called in, not as a suspect, but as a witness, to explain.
My home was finally secure. My future belonged to me. Sometimes I think back to the moment my mother stood in the same kitchen, hands on her hips, announcing that the house was a family investment. In a strange way, she wasn't wrong, just not in the way she meant. Their chapter ended in court filings, collection letters, cramped apartments, and lives that kept shrinking. Mine was only beginning. For the first time, things felt balanced. They had pushed me out, leaned on me, and tried to claim what I built as their own. In the end, all they really gave me was distance and the drive to build a life they could never control. When the lawyers stopped calling and the letters finally slowed, an uncomfortable truth settled in. Winning doesn't replace what you never had. There was no moment of clarity for them, no apology, no quiet realization. They continued telling anyone who would listen that I'd destroyed their lives, that I'd chosen a house over my own family. I used to replay that accusation over and over, wondering if there was some version of this story where I could have saved them without losing myself. But every time I walked through my front door, dropped my keys into the bowl by the entryway, and felt the calm of knowing I was safe, I had my answer. They spent years teaching me that love meant self-sacrifice for their comfort. Cutting them off was the first boundary I ever set without asking permission. Slowly, my life filled with different kinds of people. Coworkers who noticed when I looked worn down and checked in. Neighbors who brought over cookies after I helped shovel their sidewalk. Friends who slept on my couch not because they had nowhere else to go, but because we stayed up too late laughing to bother driving home. On Wednesday nights, I started hosting a small group at my dining table, a mismatched mix of people with their own complicated family stories. We didn't sit around trashing our parents. We talked about boundaries, about therapy, about emergency savings, about the first time each of us realized we were allowed to say no without writing a full explanation to justify it. My house became exactly what my parents once tried to claim it was, not a family asset, but a safe place, somewhere people could land, catch their breath, and then take off again on their own terms. Sometimes, late at night, I'd stand in the doorway of the spare room, the one they wanted for themselves, and just look at it. The neatly made bed, the bookshelf, the small desk where I sometimes wrote. I could see two timelines layered over each other. In one, my parents filled that room with slammed doors, constant criticism, and tension that turned my home into another place I tiptoed through. In the life I chose, that room stayed open for the version of me who needed it most, and for anyone else who needed proof that starting over was possible. Choosing yourself over your family isn't easy. It's one of the hardest decisions I've ever made. There are still holidays where it stings to scroll past photos of big, smiling families gathered around long tables, but I've learned something I won't unlearn. Being related to someone doesn't give them the right to hurt you again and again. Blood doesn't grant automatic access to your time, your money, or your home. Love without respect isn't love, it's control wearing a nicer name. My parents used to say I'd thank them one day for kicking me out. I don't thank them for the cruelty or the lies, but I can say this. The day they threw me out on my birthday was the day I stopped living in their story and started writing my own. If you're listening to this and seeing pieces of your own life in mine, hear this clearly. You're not crazy. You're not selfish. You're not ungrateful. And you're not alone. You're allowed to protect yourself. You're allowed to build a life that the people who hurt you don't get to enter. They said this house was about family. They were right about one thing. It is.